Are you a landlord who is doing AB 1482 wrong? I'm not trying to call you out. We're here to help. And renters, do you have a landlord who's doing AB 1482 wrong? And what do I even mean by that, doing that wrong? I'm going to explain. Hey there, Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates. We have been helping renters and landlords understand their rights before things go wrong. And we're here with a big update on AB 1482. We were that's actually where we gained traction back in the day on our channel, amongst many other topics, including the eviction moratoria, where we talked about AB 1482, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. And yes, we are in 2023 right now. So AB 1482, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, actually went into effect during COVID. So July of 2020, when we were still trying to adapt and figure out where everything was, that's when AB 1482 went into place. And I'll explain briefly what the AB 1482 is, what the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 is. What we've found is that there's quite a few landlords who don't yet even know about AB 1482, and we're years into it. It's about almost 3 years old now. That a landlord was required to give the exemption notice. So we're going to run through a bunch of different things related to AB 1482. I'm hoping to get some good questions from you along the way. We'll start out, dive in. So one of the other things I want to talk about is that the allowable rental increase under AB 1482, that is about to change come August. It's not going to be 10% anymore because inflation is lower. We're going to go through those numbers. And we're going to talk about, we'll go from basic to advanced and everywhere in between on AB 1482. A few important things before we begin. One is, like I always say, we can't give tax or legal advice, but for the most honest and up-to-date real estate advice, subscribe to this channel. And we have Michelle, who's helping out in the stratosphere somewhere. She's out there to help, so she's going to help with comments. Make sure you keep it clean. Make sure you give us some questions. There's no dumb questions at all. We won't make fun of you. Don't worry. I've asked some stupid questions myself. So make sure you post those about AB 1482. We'd like to stay on topic, but if you have other landlord-renter questions, we won't be afraid to answer, and we'll do our best. So let's dive in. Where do you guys want to start first? Oh, how about a quick understanding of what the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 is. So this is statewide legislation in the state of California that literally covers every rental property in the state of California, and mobile homes, they were added in as well. So any tenancy that's going to be 30 days or longer, so this doesn't apply to vacation rentals necessarily unless they stay longer than 30 days. So this would be any tenancy 30 days or longer. That property is going to be covered by the Tenant Protection Act. Now, properties are subject to the Tenant Protection Act, which means they fall under what we're about to discuss, or they're exempt from the Tenant Protection Act. We're going to talk about exemptions and a huge mistake that many landlords make and end up losing their exemption. So the Tenant Protection Act is broken down into a rent cap portion and a just cause portion. So the rent cap portion caps rents. It basically says how much that a property that is subject to AB 1482, how much the rent can be increased. Now, what that formula is for properties subject to AB 1482, it is 5% plus the consumer price index with a maximum of 10%. So a lot of California, the maximum rent increase under AB 1482 is running at 10% because we had our 5% and inflation itself has been above 5%. So we hit that ceiling. We hit that 10% ceiling. So that is important to understand that until August 1st of this year, that rent can be increased 10% for properties subject to AB 1482. If you're exempt from AB 1482, theoretically, there isn't a limit on the rent increase that can be done. Just bear in mind, and this is another one that a lot of folks forget, that 10% or less for a rent increase is a 30-day notice. Anything above 10% in a year, that is going to require a 90-day notice. So 10.1% increase on a property that's exempt from AB 1482, that is going to be a 90-day rental increase. Okay, so the other side of it is the just cause protections. And by just cause, we mean there's actually two categories of just cause. One is at fault and one is no fault. And by fault, we mean the tenant's fault. So at fault, most common one would be non-payment of rent. As you know, if you don't pay your rent, you can be evicted. The eviction moratorium is over due to COVID in all of the state as of right now. So if you're not paying rent as of right now, we're going into June, you can be evicted in the state of California. First, a 3-day pay or quit, and then you move on. If you don't pay, it goes to unlawful detainer. So that's an at-fault reason. There's several of them, and we'll probably look at a bunch of them. We'll see what questions we get. Then the other side of it is the no fault. So no fault means that the tenant hasn't done anything wrong. The landlord just wants to go ahead and get the tenant out. Under AB 1482, there's very few reasons a landlord can do that. And again, we'll discuss those briefly. Owner move-in would be an example. That's one that is a just cause, no fault reason. Extensive remodel, that's another one. Substantial remodel is actually what the bill says. It technically says substantially remodel. So that would be an allowable no fault reason. And the landlord will owe relocation assistance. So minimum of 1 month's rent, relocation assistance will be due to the tenant, or the landlord can waive the last month's rent. If they're going to give the money, it's within 15 days of the notice. If they're going to waive the last month's rent, they just put that on the notice. So that is what happens to a property that is subject to AB 1482. Has to be just cause, and relocation assistance will be owed. If you're exempt from AB 1482, and we'll run through exemptions quickly, you will not owe relocation assistance, and you don't have to have any reason to terminate a tenancy. You don't have to give a reason to terminate a tenancy. So let's switch gears. Relocation assistance, well, let's back up. AB 1482 is at the statewide level. Just understand that there can be more strict provisions underneath that. So at the county level or at the city or municipality level, if they have more strict regulations, those trump AB 1482. They supersede AB 1482, and that will take effect. And for example, one common one in certain areas is the relocation assistance amount is higher. So some areas it'll be 3 months rent will be the relocation assistance amount that's due. Another thing that we run into is the rent stabilization ordinances. So for example, LA County, LA City, other places in California have rent stabilization ordinances that are very different and much more strict than AB 1482. So you could be exempt under AB 1482 in LA City if you have a house, a single family home, but you're subject to their regulations. They have a just cause ordinance that applies to single family homes. So that's a quick rundown. Let's talk about exemptions for AB 1482. And it's a relatively short list. There's actually two different lists, technically, whether you're talking about the just cause provision or the rent cap provision. We won't dive too deeply into that. But one of the first exemptions that applies, that a lot of people forget, is the tenant has to be there for a minimum of 12 months. So if you have a month-to-month tenant and it's month 9's coming up and you want to terminate their tenancy, even if it's a huge apartment building, they're month to month, they haven't been there for over a year, they aren't subject to AB 1482. So that's an important point. Next would be single family homes. Most single family homes throughout the state of California are exempt from AB 1482. And that is a non-corporate owned home is exempt from AB 1482. Now, if you happen to have your home in an LLC, your rental property in an LLC as a landlord or a trust, that doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically subject to AB 1482. If the LLC is a single member LLC and it's just a person behind it, you're still exempt. Same thing with the trust. What they're really trying to get after is they're trying to go after big corporate landlords who own hundreds of properties. Those are the ones who are not exempt from AB 1482. Okay, moving on. So most single-family homes and condos are exempt from AB 1482. Next step, and we move up the food chain in the size of properties. Next would be a duplex. So an owner-occupied duplex is exempt from AB 1482 as long as the owner was living in one part of that duplex before the tenant moved in and is still living in the duplex while the tenant is given the notice. That would be the example where an owner occupied duplex is exempt from AB 1482. It wouldn't be the case where, let's say, you buy a duplex, move into one of the units, that doesn't automatically make the other side of it exempt from AB 1482 if that tenant was there before you. So that's another important point. A lot of people forget that. Another big category would be, so then moving up. So if you're triplex or bigger, you potentially are subject to AB 1482 based on unit size. An owner occupied triplex, an owner occupied 100-unit building is not exempt from AB 1482. The next big category where this ropes in some of the big buildings would be the rolling date of 15 years or newer. So if the certificate of occupancy was released within the past 15 years for the property, it is exempt from AB 1482. It's a rolling date. So you could have a 100-unit apartment building that was built 5 years ago. All those units are exempt from AB 1482. The tenants can be asked to move out for no reason at all if they're month to month, and rents can be increased to any number if they're month to month. As soon as it hits 15 years in one day, that building loses its AB 1482 exemptions. And that's as of right now, as long as nothing changes. We may have some people asking about SB 567, which is potentially going to change AB 1482. All right, so I hope you guys, we got some good questions coming in. I appreciate that. Good to see you all nighter. Thanks for coming out, bud. Appreciate that. So let's talk about literally the biggest mistake. So this would be worth the price of admission, even though it didn't cost you anything to be here. This is worth the price of admission and more. And one of the most common questions I get from landlords is, what happens if I didn't give the exemption form? That is literally the biggest mistake. Landlords, in order to claim your AB 1482 exemption, you have to give the appropriate exemption language. And that's unfortunately what a lot of landlords don't do. And you don't have to take my word for it. I am going to actually let's dive into AB 1482 itself. And let's see, it's tiny print, so it's going to be hard to read, but we're going to dive in and I'm going to show you a few odds and ends, and then we're going to show you the separate law. All right, bear with me. I lost that one. How about we do this? Oh no, there it is. All right, let's get this up there. All right, cool. So this is AB 1482 itself. This is what a bill like AB 1482 does, is it modifies the civil code in California. So that's what's important to understand. Pardon me while I find it. So it's important to understand. So AB 1482, and we'll have a link below so you can see this. This is actually a cool tool if you guys haven't played with it before. You can look at bill analysis, today's law is amended, etc. Compare versions. Until it's passed, all bets are off. And that's why SB 567, and I have it up here somewhere, potentially we'll talk about that. That's potentially going to make some changes to AB 1482. The problem is we won't know for sure until it's finally done exactly the changes. So AB 1482, what it specifically changed was the sections in 1946.2, which is related to just cause terminations, and then 1947.12. There's no test on this, don't worry. Those are the rent increases. 1947.13 doesn't really pertain to us. That's if a property is being removed from an affordable housing market. So AB 1482, this runs through and it talks about what was added into the actual legislation. It talks about which properties are exempt. I have links to 1946.2 that I can show you. And in fact, let's switch to that. So now we're looking at 1946.2, and this is important. This is talking about just cause. So this talks about at fault, no fault. What it also talks about is the exemption. And this right here, I know it's tiny, you can't see it. circling back to what I was talking about with the disclosure, the exemption, you need to provide this language to the tenant. And this is the specific language right here, that the property is not subject to section 1947.12 and section 1946.2. Even if you meet every other exemption qualification, if you have not given this to the tenant, and I'll show you specifically when you have to give it to the tenant, we're going to talk about that because that's another common mistake. If you don't give that, then the property is not exempt. And here, I'm having fun with this. I've done videos on all this, so you guys, you can watch an entire playlist of all this different content. So here's the rent cap and just cause addendum. This is through the California Association of Realtors. You do not have to use this specific form. This specific form does actually have everything that's needed and has a good breakdown for you as a landlord or renter to understand AB 1482. I have a link below if you want to download a sample of this. So this is now included when any real estate agent uses a California Association of Realtors a rental agreement or lease. This is included in there with that lease. You can't not include it. And in addition to other required disclosures, we've done content on that a lot of landlords miss. But here's the thing. This form is powerless and useless if you have an exempt property and you don't check this box right here. And circling back, this is what I find when landlords reach out to me for help or renters reach out to me for help. I can't give tax or legal advice like I always say, but I do want to see if this was given to the renter, and I want to see if the box was checked. I'm listing a property for a landlord here in the next couple of weeks, and his previous agent gave this disclosure but did not check this box. So in other words, he didn't have the exemption because he didn't check that box. So he didn't realize that his condo was actually subject to AB 1482, and he actually didn't know what AB 1482 was. I don't blame him. There's a lot to know. Okay, so let's go ahead and move back up here. Let's see if there's any questions. There's a few that we can bring up. So living authentically with Carrie, she posted these a while back. I figured I'd dive in and answer. So landlord tried evicting me and I won in court. He really wants me gone. Live in LA City, live in an RSO apartment, want to do cash for keys for 30. So there's a reason I'm bringing this up, even though it doesn't on the face of it apply to AB 1482. It talks about relocation assistance. So she owes some back rent. What she wants to do is essentially deduct that from the cash for keys amount if she can get a place across the street. So LA City, the RSO, is more strict than AB 1482. So that is a case where she can ask for a higher relocation assistance. It's actually very difficult. It's much more strict than AB 1482. So it's important. The reason I want to address that, she can theoretically ask for that money that she wants. It's up to negotiating with the landlord. But you need to know as a landlord and a renter, where do you fall? Do you fall just under the Tenant Protection Act? Are you exempt or subject to the Protection Act? If you're exempt from the Tenant Protection Act as a renter and your landlord delivers a 60-day notice, you don't have to know why, and you don't have to get any relocation assistance unless there's a more strict regulation in place in your area that states that you must. So that's why it's important to understand your local area. And there's nuances. Nobody knows all of the local areas. It's tough to know them all, and it changes. Regulations are continuing to be added. Pasadena, South Pasadena, is literally changing things by the week. Why don't they respect a month-to-month lease? Either landlords or tenants can terminate tenancy without reason. So Juan, good question. So if it's exempt from AB 1482, if the property meets the requirements and the language has been given, then the landlord can terminate a tenancy without a reason. But maybe the bigger question you're asking here, Juan, is why is this in place? And really why it's in place is to protect renters and allow renters to stay. I just was talking to Kenny, a great attorney. I highly recommend Kenny for landlords who need an attorney's help. Renters, you can turn to Stay Housed LA if you're in LA. You can lawhelpca.org. Anywhere in California, you can get help there. There's legal aid societies that'll help tenants, but for landlords, I was talking to Kenny about this, and What Kenny was saying is what had to happen in order to cap rent increases, you have to put in a just cause provision because we have in the state of California what's known as vacancy decontrol. And I'm going deep. I might lose some of you here. But vacancy decontrol means that if a tenant moves out, the landlord is able to reset the rent to market rent. Now, there is one exception to this, and that's if there's an emergency that's a local emergency declared, then that rent can only be increased 10% if a tenant moves out. But that's another topic for discussion. So vacancy decontrol, rent can be reset to market. So if you don't put in just cause protections, what landlords will do, because they want to be able to raise their rents to get them to market, they will go ahead and just kick all their tenants out. So very often when you have a rent control ordinance, you'll have a just cause ordinance that prevents landlords from kicking tenants out and getting rents to market unless there's very strict reasons. So they go hand in hand, attempting to keep rents down. Another good way to keep rents down, by the way, would be to build a whole lot more apartments, condos, and houses. That is a really good reason to keep rents down. Thanks, All Night. I appreciate that. Hit the like button. I'd appreciate if you do that. All right, let's see. We'll dive into some questions here, and then we're going to talk about a few other minutiae, minor details on AB 1482. So, Karina, landlords offering 23 to move out due to a major building renovations. Liars. They have new tenants moving in at a higher rate. Rent control building. Yeah, Karina, I recognize you. Thanks for coming out for this. And I'm not laughing because you called them liars. I mean, it's what's unfortunate is that the substantial remodel is being abused by landlords, and it's being abused by the bad apples. So the bad apples are the ones that are making it tough for landlords who are legitimately trying to follow the laws. And that's usually the people watching my channel are landlords that are trying to understand the laws and follow the laws. So I would say, Karina, depending on where you are, I think you're in LA City, if I remember correctly. If they're going to be doing extensive renovations, it's either going to be a substantial remodel that they're getting you out, or they're doing the Ellis Act, which some of you may have heard about that apartment building in LA where they're using the Ellis Act to redo it. So, Karina, if it's a substantial remodel, they need to give you the permits when they deliver the notice. So ask for copies of the permits. That's going to help keep them more honest about it. And then you can ask there's a form that needs to be filed with LA City as well that explains the renovation. So definitely reach out to an attorney on that one, Karina. All right, more questions coming in. I appreciate these questions. Keep them coming, you guys. Live in Torrance, 100 plus unit. New owners bought the apartment and then promised that we can stay during the renovation. 14 months living in, I'm sure that's not Hill, from the construction work. Yeah, that's unfortunately a way that landlords will get tenants out, is by just making it miserable to live there, causing you're not able to, you don't have quiet enjoyment anymore when they are doing construction from sun up till sundown. And that is a way that some landlords try to get renters out. That's where tenants can come together, get some legal assistance, and fight back. And now they're renting new tenants. All of a sudden, they issue a 60-day notice without offering us to stay. So if that's Torrance, I'd have to double check the map. They probably can't just get people out with a 60-day notice. So that's one for an attorney to discuss with them. All Nighter, what do you got, buddy? Yeah, sounds like new landlords kept the existing tenants, letting go the ones they don't jive with. That's possible. But here's what I'll say to that, All Nighter. Usually by they don't jive with, that means that their rent is not market. That's usually what it is. So, Karina, there was a leak in your bathroom. Code enforcement came 3 times, nothing done. They keep giving them time. Yeah, code enforcement is overstaffed. Overworked and understaffed. So they're doing their best, but keep trying to work with them to get an issue like that taken care of. Yeah, I see you say you're in Van Nuys. Certain spots in Van Nuys do fall under LA City. All right. Obi-Wan, hope your day is going well. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. It is a good day. So let's go on. I want to go ahead and submit some more questions in there. We're going to dive into a few more odds and ends that the minutiae that are important. So again, this is the rent cap and just cause form that you can use as a landlord from the California Association of Realtors. I have a sample you can download. You can also get this from any realtor you're working with. If you join an apartment association, they're going to have their own form, and that form is one that you can use as long as it has the required language on it. Okay, so now I'm going to go to an important deadlines calendar. And here's what's important on this one. There's a lot going on. This is actually from a video I did on the deadlines. And there's a lot of landlords that miss the deadlines. And it does matter for some, it doesn't matter for others. If you're subject to AB 1482 as a landlord and you miss the deadline, you still need to give the notice that you're subject to AB 1482. But there's really no penalty per se right now. SB 567 may change that. The people it matters to more are landlords who want to save their exemption. So let's talk about those. So this would be a property that is exempt, and it would apply to either 15 years or newer, or would apply to the condos. If the tenant moved in before July 1st, 2020, and the landlord has not given a new lease or has not given an update to the rental agreement at all, so nothing, then the landlord can give the AB 42 exemption notice. The landlord is able to capture their AB 1482 exemption. Again, this is a tenant before July 1st of 2020, and then they haven't received any lease or any rental agreement extension. The landlord could give that exemption notice and then go ahead and terminate the tenancy with a 60-day notice and won't owe any relocation assistance. Here's the landlord who's in trouble, and this is important for you renters to understand, because some landlords may want to try to fake that they still have AB 1482 exemption when they don't, because they miss the deadlines. So if a tenant has moved in after July 1st of 2020 and the landlord did not include that in the rental agreement that was signed after July 1st of 2020, the landlord has lost their AB 1482 exemption. Okay, you understand that distinction? So if it's before July 1st of 2020, and the landlord hasn't given them any other paperwork related to an extension or lease renewal, AB 1482 exemption can be given. If it is July 1st, if you've moved in July 1st, 2020 or later, and you were not given when you signed the lease the AB 1482 exemption, then you as a renter, you're subject to AB 1482, and as a landlord, you're subject to AB 1482. So that's an important thing to note, that there are many landlords who lost it. That's, again, one of the biggest mistakes. So let's go ahead and go back. Some questions. Obi-Wan, has LAHT started accepting applications for LS Act? Yes, sir. As of April 1st, they are accepting applications for the LS Act. So make sure you reach out. If you visit their site, if you Google up LAHT renter protections, you'll find they have a page that breaks it all down, and they've been accepting those applications again. And then I remember this, Karina, about Section 1954 of the Civil Code and the right to refuse entry to the landlord. It's very narrow, being able to refuse entry, and it's usually related to one of two things. One is they didn't give you proper notice, you can refuse entry, or two, it's related to they're using it as a form of harassment. You can refuse entry for that. If a landlord is giving a written notice and is there every day, a few hours a day for no reason, pretending to work on stuff, doing it out of harassment, that would be an unlawful use of Section 1954. So just discuss with an attorney. I know I've seen this. You mentioned this before, where you don't feel safe, and I'm sorry to hear that. Potentially, you can have someone else be there with you, or you could have somebody be there instead of you as well. So sorry to hear that. Okay, let's go back to AB 1482. A few more things, and I'm going to let you guys go. I have to make sure I pick up Liam from football at 6:30, so it looks like I'll be good. Don't let me forget Liam. He's the one who came up with the Google it up. So let's talk about the new price, the new rent cap increases. That's definitely important to understand. And here's what's exciting, if you want to call it exciting. Some areas, the rent cap is below 10%. In some areas, it's above 10%. So you are not going to, it's going to be a patchwork for landlords and renters. They're going to have to figure out what it is that their local rent increases are. So what it is based on what 1947.12, if you want to look at the civil code, what it says is that it's based on the consumer price index for certain areas in April. And if it doesn't have the number in April, going from April 2022 to April 2023, if it doesn't have that, it's March 2022 to March 2023. It's the consumer price index increase year over year for April, and it starts August 1st of that year. So coming August 1st, here are our new numbers. So for Los Angeles and Orange County, this is the same number for both of them. We look at April and we see the number is 3.8. So April 2022 to April 2023, the consumer price index increased 3.8. What that means is we add that to our 5%. So as of August 1st, 2023, the new rent cap in Los Angeles and Orange County, drumroll, 8.8%. So it is no longer 10%. So landlords cannot increase rent any higher than 8.8% in a year for properties subject to AB 1482. Okay, let's go to San Diego. And you've got to get a different number for each area. Like I said, it's going to be a nice, fun patchwork. So San Diego is one where we don't have the April numbers. So what 1947.12 says is we use March's numbers. So March of 2022 to March of 2023, the increase is 5.3%. So raise your hand if you know the answer. What will the increase be for San Diego? Put it in the comments. Let's see if anybody does. Let me know and I'll tell you if you got it right. And then, so that was San Diego. Now we're looking at Riverside, San Bernardino. And that's another one where we don't have April, so we use March. So March of 2022 to March of 2023 for Riverside and San Bernardino, the max rent increase will be 5% plus 4.6. So 9.6% increase. Does that all make sense? I hope I didn't lose you guys. So there's your new increased numbers. There's a delay. Nobody put the answer in yet for San Diego. What's the maximum rent increase for San Diego as of August 1st, 2023? Put that in the comments and I will, I'll say if you're right or not. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground. Let me check my notes. Oh, okay. Let's go ahead and talk about accessory dwelling units and the lovely gift that you're given with accessory dwelling units. So what you need to understand for accessory dwelling units, if you add an ADU to multifamily, it doesn't change anything. You're already subject to AB 1482. If you add an ADU to a single family home, yes, there you go. Good job, bud. All nighter, you get the apple and the star, 10%. That's right. So because the 5% plus the 5.3 is higher than 10%, San Diego, the maximum increases will be 10%. So that's for SD. Thank you. You were close, Carrie. It's 5% plus 5.3% of the cap of 10. So it's 10%. So thanks for playing on that, you guys. Yeah, so that's it. So we have, what did I say? 8.8 for LA and Orange County, 9 point whatever for Riverside, San Bernardino, 10% for San Diego. You think anybody's going to screw that up? It is going to get nice and confusing. But as a renter or landlord, make sure you know those. Okay. ADUs. So you have a single family home, you decide to add an ADU to the single family home. Guess what you do? You lose at least a portion of your AB 1482 exemption. So what happens there is the brand new ADU will be exempt from AB 1482 because it's less than 15 years old. But what it does is if the house is older than 19 or older than 15 years ago, then that is now going to be subject to the just cause provision in AB 1482, not the rent cap provision. So you'll be subject to half of AB 1482 if you add an ADU to your lot. So it'll be affecting the house. So if you're living in the house, that's not a big deal. You're not going to give yourself an AB 1482 disclosure. But if you decide to move into that ADU, just know that you have a partial exemption and a partial subject to on AB 1482. That's throughout the state of California. Isn't that nice? Most people don't know that. Most people don't discuss that. What it does trigger in certain areas, for example, LA County, LA City, that's LA County unincorporated. If you add an ADU, you will basically then fall under their RSO, their rent stabilization ordinance, and you will have much more strict guidelines. So while ADUs have been an amazing way to add additional housing in in California in general, they continue to make it easier through the regulations they passed. What they haven't done at the statewide level and local levels, they've made it any easier to rent those out for tenants and go ahead as a landlord and be exempt from AB 1482. So that's I'll probably turn that into a short because that's one of the more thorough explanations of ADUs. All right, so I think we covered it. I mean, we can go ahead and show SB 567 briefly. Again, I hesitate to look at this too closely because it's going to change. Did I close it out? All right, let me Google it up. So what SB 567 is it is a way to modify AB 1482. So AB 1482 is set to be in place until 2030, and they've already cleaned it up once, and it looks like they're going to want to try to clean it up again. But it is very interesting, the changes. So this SB 567, let's see where it is. So the bill analysis, again, this is cool stuff. It'll go ahead and talk. It analyzes the bill. I mean, that's what it is. So you can dive in and read that. The votes so far, it's how it's been voted. History. So right now it's at it was read at its second time and it's ordered to its third reading. It was amended on the 18th. So this is going on right now. Here's today's law as amended. Let's go back because this is the text of it. So everything that's redacted here, those are some of the changes they've made to the bill itself. The blue would be new in the legislation, and it's going to make some changes to it. I don't want to dive too deeply into it because this stuff will change, but just know that AB 1482 is not cast in stone, and we could see that it's expanded on what it covers. I don't think it'll cover single family homes and condos, but maybe, especially if Costa-Hawkins is rolled back. So anyway, so that, just be aware SB 567 is out there and could be changing things. Any other questions? All right. So let's wrap it up. So anything I didn't cover or you're watching this at a later point in time, make sure you put your questions below. One thing I want to say, I don't know how to say this. I'm a real estate broker, as I mentioned, and the way I put food on the table is by doing real estate deals. I can help you in Southern California. I have a regional sales and marketing center in Orange County and LA, pretty much cover all of Southern California. If it's too far away, I will find another agent and I will help make sure that agent does everything right. Same thing in Northern California. So what I would ask you is definitely think of me when it comes to real estate, whether you're looking to buy or sell, but expect more from your agents. If you are working with people who don't understand the basics of AB 1482, as a real estate agent, and I don't mean to call out my profession, but there are way too many agents who don't understand it. And I give you credit if you're taking the time to learn agents, but as a customer or a client, the difference being a customer is just somebody who's walking by a real estate agent talking to them. A client is somebody where the real estate agent owes a fiduciary responsibility. If you're a client, make sure your real estate agent understands AB 1482. If you're renting anything, if you're buying anything with tenants, You need to know if you're thinking about renting out your property and buying another one. That's common these days. You got a 2.5% interest rate. You want to keep that property rented out. Talk about AB 1482. Expect more from your agents. You deserve that. We got to raise the bar in my industry. So just wanted to mention that. All right, off my soapbox now. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you for all your continued support. We're going to keep these lives coming. If you have any topics you want me to cover in a live, please let me know. I'm interested in potentially expanding this, talking about Prop 19. There's a lot of questions I get on that. If you're interested in learning more on Prop 19, let me know. If you want a day in the life of a real estate agent, let me know. I am open to content. Like I said, can't give tax or legal advice. Subscribe to our free weekly email newsletter so that we can send you every Sunday updates that you need to know, and they're there when you need to know them. So thanks for tuning in. This has been Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates, and we want to hear from you.